You know, Jews and Christians consider the Bible, the Torah, to be the words of God. But it has been said that Christians read the Torah, the Bible, Jews study it. Let me give you an example of that from a very famous verse in this week's Torah portion, that if you read it, it says one thing. If you study it, it says something completely different. This week we read the double portion of Acharei Mot and Kedoshim. In the Sedra of Kedoshim, representing holiness, we have a very famous law that says, Lifnei iver lo sitein mechshol. You should not place a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Now, if you just read this verse, that's what the verse says. Don't put something in front of a blind person that he's not going to see and he's going to fall over. But to our sages in the Talmud, that's not what it says. To the sages in the Talmud, we don't need a law to tell us that. We're told to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, so certainly that would include not putting something in front of a blind person to trip him up. So our sages studied this verse, and you'd be amazed at the diverse laws we learn from this. This law is telling us, for example, that somebody who is an alcoholic, you're not allowed to offer him a drink. You're tempting him. You're going to cause him to trip up. Another law we learn from this, you're not allowed to hit your teenage child. A teenager is liable to strike back, and you caused him or put him in that position to stumble. You should know, according to our rabbis, one of the reasons why we have a matzeva, a tombstone, is because we were concerned that people shouldn't walk over a grave. And if it wasn't marked, you would be causing someone to stumble. A whole aspect of gun control, according to our sages, comes from this. Not to give a weapon to somebody who's going to be tempted or whose nature is to use that weapon for destruction. And one other law I would point out that's relevant to our day and age. You shall not put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Teaches us you should not give someone bad advice that's going to cause them to fall on their face. Now, what does it mean, bad advice? We're not always sure if our advice is good or bad. What our sages say is we shouldn't give advice that has our own ulterior motive. We shouldn't tell our friend to sell his field because we had in mind to buy it. That's tripping him up for no reason. Be careful about the advice you give. And I would tell you in our day and age, be careful about the advice you receive. We're all looking for advice these days on how to handle the coronavirus. And so we read the newspapers and we watch on television, and we're getting advice from all over, from people we don't know, from people who don't know. And yet we listen to them. But so many of them have their own agenda. Yes, it's more apt to hear someone who's a Republican to be speaking in terms of opening up the economy to somebody who's a liberal Democrat who's expressing more concern for life. There is an agenda, there is a bias. It's not a matter of right or wrong. But I would tell you, be careful from whom you take advice, because the advice you hear on Fox News is going to be different than the advice you hear from CNN. The advice you hear from the President of the United States may be different than the advice you would hear from the governor of Georgia. They each have their own agenda in the advice they're giving. So what do? I don't listen to Dr. Oz or Dr. Gupte. I don't listen to CNN or to Fox, the Wall Street Journal, or the New York Times. If I'm looking for advice on how to handle the virus, I certainly don't ask a rabbi. What do I know about viruses? I don't know the difference between a virus and a bacteria, between a cell and a gene. I don't know if you feed a cold or starve a fever or the reverse. When I want advice about the coronavirus, I go to the doctor and I listen to him. And you know what? That's the best advice I can give to you these days. It comes with no agenda and it comes with no bias. It comes from the heart. Shabbat Shalom.